Hi everyone! Before we dive into this week's episode, please check out our promo of the week.
Hi, I'm Taylor.
Hi, I'm Jenny.
Are you into ghosts, aliens, or murder? It's okay if you do, because we love terrible things too.
It's why we started our podcast, A Little Bit Grim.
We talk about the paranormal,
True crime,
folklore,
cults,
conspiracies,
some disasters,
and every other heinous thing that could possibly happen to a person.
It's a little bit spooky.
It's a little bit funny.
And it's a little bit grim.
And you can find us wherever you like to stream your podcasts.
And find us on your favorite social media platforms.
We'll see you there. Goodbye!
Hi, I'm Laura.
And I'm Jo.
And this is Crime Divers.
Hello everybody, welcome to today's episode.
Hello everyone. So we're just going to dive right into today's episode. We will highlight our missing person at the end of the episode. They are from Arizona, so if you want to hang around then, we shall give you all the details.
Yep.
So Jill, where in the world are we?
We are in the UK.
Awesome. And what is it called?
It's called The Bodies in the Garden.
I guess that's self-explanatory.
Yeah. So basically this is a little bit different to normal because I'm actually just going to dive right into it and tell you exactly what happened and we know straight away who done it.
Right.
So that's a little bit different to what we usually do, isn't it?
It certainly is. Cool. Shall we dive in then?
Yeah. So on the 1st of October 2013, at 11 o'clock in the morning, the East Midlands Serious Crime Squad received a phone call claiming that two people had been killed and their bodies were buried in a garden in a place called Mansfield, which is in Nottinghamshire, and that the bodies had been there for 15 years.
Oh wow. I wasn't expecting it to be there that long.
The lady who called the police told them that her stepson, Christopher Edwards, who at the moment he was in France with his wife Susan, they were living there, he had called, so the stepson had called her and told her that 15 years ago, Susan had been responsible for or involved in the shooting of her parents, who were subsequently buried by her and Christopher in the garden where her parents had lived, somewhere in Mansfield.
Oh right, okay.
So Christopher had called his stepmom for help, which we'll get into later. Like, actually, why I did phone her.
Right.
But instead, like, you know, most people, she phoned the police.
So was he not expecting her to do that?
No, he was obviously expecting
Just
help.
advice?
Yeah, and
How'd you give somebody advice on that?
she was like, no, I'm just going to phone the police.
Yeah.
So,
To be fair, sensible choice.
yeah, exactly. So this information was given to Detective Superintendent Rob Griffin, who was a DCI at the time. When he heard that story for the first time, he said it just kind of sounded bizarre and sort of almost unbelievable. So obviously his first job was to find out if this was actually true, because the police did wonder if it was a hoax. Because if it was true, well, why haven't these people been reported as missing?
Missing, yeah.
So, it's been 15 years.
Well, exactly, yeah.
So that's why they did wonder if it was maybe
You
a
think
hoax.
someone would have noticed that they weren't around or they had just disappeared or whatever.
you would have thought that somebody would have noticed. So, Rob Griffin searched police records and found that Christopher Edwards, he had actually been in contact with the police as well. So when he'd phoned his stepmom, she told him that she was going to phone the police.
Fair enough.
So I think that's why he
Decided to do it as well.
he decided to do it as well.
Did we find out why he all of a sudden, after so long, decided to
Yeah.
phone her? Do you tell us that later?
Yeah, being impatient.
I know, but I know because I want to ask the question, but I'm thinking you're probably going to tell me later.
Yeah.
But I just want to make sure you're.
It'll all become clear.
Oh, okay.
So he had left a message with the police with a mobile number and an email address. So Rob Griffin, the DCI, he did try to contact Christopher, but he never replied to his messages and he didn't answer the phone. So I think he maybe just kind of bottled it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, he probably thought, now it's a bit real, I'm just going to
Yeah.
not deal with this.
Just going to ignore it and maybe it'll go away.
Yeah.
So after taking a full statement from Christopher's stepmom, Rob Griffin's team discovered that she had never actually met Susan's parents, so she didn't know where they had lived, she didn't know where they were buried.
Right, okay.
So the police were able to work that out pretty quickly and easily through the births, deaths and marriages. So they found Christopher and Susan's marriage certificate, and from that they found their birth certificates, and from that they found their their parents.
Right.
So they found out that Susan's parents were Patricia and William Wycherley. So it was weird though, because police managed to find a photo of William, but not of Patricia. And like all through this, the whole thing, they've never found any photos of Patricia.
Oh, right.
Which, I know. I get you, Patricia. I mean, I hate getting my photo taken, but there is photos of me.
Well, I know, you'd think there would be some photos. But
Even like from
family occasion.
or even like maybe some that you keep from your childhood that you'd have some sentimental. I mean, I've got photos of me when I was little, photos of you when you were little. Like,
Oh yeah, well, they're still up on Mum's wall at the minute. Photos of us when we were little.
it's just a bit strange, isn't it? And the fact that they only found one photo of William as well, it's very strange.
Maybe they just weren't a photo taking family.
Obviously not. But however, because they had their names, so finding their last known address was fairly straightforward. So they had lived in a place called Blenheim Close, which is a small area on the outskirts of Mansfield. So now they just had to find out if the Wycherleys were still alive, because obviously they're still. This is basically what they're trying to find out first.
Before they go searching, I suppose.
Yeah, or as the police had been told, dead and buried in the garden. So the police started proof of life inquiries. So people who are alive obviously leave a footprint wherever they go.
Yeah.
Whether that be because they are registered with utility companies or through like banking or having a passport or and through making those inquiries, the police arrived at the conclusion that there was no evidence that they were still alive.
Right.
But at the same time, there was no evidence that they'd been registered as dead, as having died either. So,
which would make sense if they were buried in a garden. I mean, there would be no activity of them being alive, and clearly nobody would.
They wouldn't have been registered.
Well, exactly, because the person that's buried them in the back of the garden ain't going to be doing that.
No. So they went. So the police. The next task was to find out all they could about the Wycherleys. So they contacted the current occupier at their old house at Blenheim Close. So they went to the house and they asked the owner, Sue Bramley, if she knew where Mr. and Mrs. Wycherley had moved to, because as we know, sometimes people leave forwarding addresses. She didn't know, but she did say there was talk of maybe they'd moved to Brighton or somewhere near there.
Right.
So when police asked other neighbours, all they knew was that the Wycherleys had moved away years ago. So they all just
assumed they'd moved away and that
they
was
just
it.
moved away and that was it, because they weren't close to their neighbours, so they just
didn't think anything of it.
Yeah. So there was another neighbour called John. He said that one day he was in his garden and he saw the Wycherleys' back door open and a man came out. He introduced himself as William's nephew, and John asked, and he was like, "Are William and Patricia okay?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, they've moved to Morecambe. They've got a bungalow up there. It's what they've always wanted to do. They've always wanted to live at the coast. They're both happy." Not that he said that all in one sentence, but as the conversation went on, that they were both happy, and that naturally John didn't think anything. He didn't think anything more about it. Oh, good for them. They've moved away. They're living their best life. Great.
Fair dues.
So the picture that started to emerge was that from 1998 onwards, the Wycherleys were no longer around. They just suddenly disappeared, and a young couple moved into the house, which was Susan and Christopher Edwards.
Right, okay.
So it wasn't his nephew, that was Christopher Edwards.
Right, okay.
I don't know how they kept that going. I don't know if the neighbour still
thought it was
his nephew, or I don't know. It doesn't matter, does it?
No.
So one neighbour recalled an event where he had heard a scratching sound coming from the garden of the Wycherleys' old house. He looked out the window and he saw the young man digging up to his waist in a hole in the ground. The guy thought it seemed strange at the time, which he would, but he didn't report it, as I'm sure he didn't think the man was digging a grave.
Well, no, exactly. I mean, you thought he was maybe doing something to the garden.
Yeah. I mean, it's, when you look back on it and you know what's happened, you think, why didn't they report it? But
again, it's one of those things, isn't it?
Yeah.
People do stuff to their gardens all the time. And
people are strange. And, you maybe would think, oh, what a weirdo, but you're not going to immediately, well, I don't know, I probably would immediately now. After being in a true crime, I probably would think, are they digging a grave? But,
true. But in that moment, you're probably not thinking anything of it. You're just thinking he's doing something in his garden.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there's plenty of people around that you see potting about their gardens and doing stuff.
So. Like, this was in the middle of the night, though, remember?
Oh, yeah, of course.
But, as I said, I mean, even in the middle of the night, some people do strange things.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe he was busy all day. He didn't have time to go and dig his garden.
Maybe not.
Yeah, so the police now had enough evidence to start digging on the 9th of October 2013. After a while, the excavation suddenly ground to a halt, and the archaeologist pointed to an area and said, "That is a classic grave."
Right.
Don't know why. Just obviously.
Obviously nosy stuff.
Yeah, I don't, so I don't know why.
Yeah, okay.
So they started to get the feeling at that point that they were in the right place, and all of what they feared it had happened. It was
True.
yeah. I didn't quite say that how I meant to say that. I meant to say all of what they feared had happened and was starting to look like that it had indeed happened.
Yeah.
Kind of wrote that a bit funny, I think. Anyway, the archaeologists had identified an area of disturbed soil roughly the size of a body, which was softer than the surrounding ground. Slowly but surely, the bodies of the Wycherleys were revealed. And just as a side note, Sue, the lady that lived in the house now, she actually said later on that she'd never been able to grow like grass or flowers in that particular area of the garden, and she's like,
That'll be
why, because she just couldn't understand why.
Yeah, why nothing would grow.
Yeah, and that's obviously why. So for 15 years, the bodies of William and Patricia Wycherley lay wrapped in a duvet just 1 metre underground in their back garden, and incredibly, nobody suspected anything.
Wow.
So it's often difficult to prove a cause of death in circumstances like these, where both Patricia and William had been buried for 15 years and all that was left were skeletal remains.
Yeah.
But each of the duvet covers had kept those skeletal. Yep. They kept the remains together and quite separate from each other. So, they were intact, which makes things a lot easier, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
And within each were 2 bullets, so it was confirmed that William and Patricia had both been shot twice.
Right.
So the police believed that Christopher and Susan Edwards were in France, because that's where his stepmom had said they were, and the police still hadn't been able to contact them. So Rob Griffin appointed a financial investigator, and what this investigator was able to do was build up a financial profile of the Edwards, so they could trace every single financial transaction they'd ever made over a 15-year period. So the hope was that their finances would give police crucial information into the lives of Christopher and Susan Edwards. So 2 weeks after the bodies were discovered, an email arrived. And this email was sent to Rob Griffin on Wednesday, the 30th of October 2013, and it was from Christopher Edwards.
Right.
And it said, "Dear DCI Griffin, later on today we are going to surrender ourselves to the UK Border Force authorities at the Eurostar terminal at Lille." Lille, I think is how you pronounce it.
Yeah.
We would prefer to do this rather than surrender to the French police, since my wife is already sufficiently frightened. Please could you notify the UK Border Force at Lille, Europe, so they may expect it. Yours sincerely, Christopher Edwards. So he obviously kind of got his balls back from, before when he'd lost kind of bottled it, and then he was like, right, okay, we're going to have to get ourselves up. So Rob Griffin actually thought that at first it was a prank, because to think somebody who's been looked for murder volunteering to come back to the UK is pretty unusual.
Yeah, I was going to say, pretty rare, probably.
Yeah, because you'd think they're in a different country, they would just stay on the run. But So arrangements were made for the return of Christopher and Susan to London later that day, and the police contacted the Metropolitan Police and the British Transport Police to ensure that when the train arrived, there were officers there to meet them and arrest them straight away. So on their arrival, Christopher and Susan calmly and willingly surrendered, as they said they would. They had brought with them pretty much everything they owned, which wasn't very much. They didn't have very much money, and they had a suitcase each, which were packed mainly with memorabilia, which was signed photographs of famous people that they loved, and that was about it. We'll get to that later.
Right, okay.
So everything will be explained.
So they had no kids?
No. So the Edwards were taken to Nottingham, where their odd collection of Hollywood memorabilia was seized, and the couple were interviewed separately. They told the police their accounts of the story, which such coldness and calmness, the police actually said it just kind of seemed quite incredible. There was just no emotion, especially because it was our parents.
Or maybe I suppose 15 years is a long time, and maybe they just thought,
had time to get their stories together. And
then they just they're like, right, this is it. Now I'm just telling you, I'm not going to have
that's
any
it, we're fucked.
Maybe they were bothered. They were just like, it's been that long, right? Okay, here's the story.
Yeah. So they told the police that on a bank holiday weekend in May 1998, have you got a headache?
No.
It was just the way you were sitting like that. May 1998, Susan had travelled by herself, because they were living in London. Susan and Christopher lived in London.
Okay.
And obviously her parents were in Nottingham. So she had travelled by herself from London to Mansfield to her parents' house to stay with them for a couple of nights. While she was there, in the middle of the night, she overheard her mum and dad arguing and then heard the sound of gunfire. When she rushed into the bedroom, her mum was standing over her dead dad with a gun in her hand. Susan and her mum then argued, and eventually the gun ended up in Susan's hand, and then she shot her mum more than once.
Oh, okay.
Susan then went back down to London. She didn't tell Christopher anything of this all week,
Okay.
but convinced him to travel back to Mansfield with her the following weekend. Like, I don't know what she would have told him to make him come back, but this is her story.
Right,
This
okay.
is their story. And when they arrived the following Friday, they went to the chippy and they bought fish and chips and they took it back to the house, to the Wycherley's house. And it was while they were eating that downstairs that Susan told Christopher what had happened the weekend before and that her dead parents were upstairs.
Oh my god. Would they not, like, smell them by then?
Well, that's what I thought. This is why I'm like, yeah, I think this story's a bit
I don't know, because I mean,
bullshit.
you know, I've heard enough true crime sort of stories to know that the decay of a body can happen quite...
Yeah.
Well, after a week, I mean, you'd smell something, wouldn't you?
You would think. But then maybe they thought it was the fish and chips.
They didn't smell like very good fish and chips then.
No. Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, they're just trying to get themselves out of it and, you know. So, both Christopher and Susan were able to pinpoint that night that had happened by saying it was the night, because they were obviously asked when it happened. And they said it was the night of the Eurovision Song Contest and it was the night that Dana International had won, which I thought was absolutely bizarre because I thought, when you do significant things in life, like murdering your parents, surely that date would be ingrained on your brain. Like, you would remember dates like that.
You think so?
But, like, and I just thought, right, you killed your parents, or you're admitting to killing one of your parents.
Yeah.
And your other parent has died. I mean, our dad's died. We know exactly what date he died on.
Yeah.
We didn't kill him, but
No.
and our mum didn't kill him, but we
No.
know what
We
that's
know.
a date that you remember, isn't it?
Yeah, of course you do.
So for them to remember the date by the Eurovision Song Contest just sounds really bizarre
Yeah,
to
you
me.
think they would remember it by the date.
Yeah, exactly, not by the Eurovision Song Contest.
Well, maybe that's just how they remember things.
Or they just could be lying.
Or yeah, it's just the story that they've obviously come up with and they're sticking to. And
Yeah.
they think that must sound good.
I think they're just very strange people, which we will get to that as well. Cool. So over the course of that weekend, Susan and Christopher together, they had decided that they would bury the Wycherleys in the garden. They were identical in what they said in almost every detail, and it was apparent to the police that all of what they were saying was rehearsed and planned.
Yeah,
I mean, they've had 15 years.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, to get it down to a T.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the problem. It was down to a T, exactly.
Every single
yeah.
detail, yeah. That's when you know it's just not that true.
Yeah, the police know, don't they?
Yeah.
They just know. So Christopher and Susan's version of events admitted manslaughter, which obviously is a much lighter sentence than premeditated murder.
Of course.
So, that's obviously what they're going for.
They're probably trying to get the best case scenario.
Yeah, exactly. They're kind of like, right, okay,
We're fucked.
we're busted.
Yeah.
So we're going to try and get the lightest sentence we can.
Exactly.
But despite all the rehearsing, their story began showing cracks, because that's what happens when you don't tell the truth.
Yep, you can't keep up a lie.
So one particular element of their account, which DCI Griffin thought really came unstuck, was the way they described the Wycherleys at the point of burial, particularly when that detail was placed alongside the evidence that was given by the Home Office forensic pathologist. At the point of burial, the Edwards had described one of the Wycherleys as being stiff, which points to rigor mortis still being present. But they referred to as the other Wycherley as being flaccid, or like kind of soft.
Yeah.
So that points to rigor mortis having already passed.
Right, okay.
So, I had a little Google about rigor
Because if they're
mortis.
dead at the same time, you'd think it would be the same.
Yeah. So rigor mortis can occur as soon as 4 hours after the death, and typically it lasts no longer than 8 hours at room temperature.
Right.
So neither of them should have.
They should both been stiff.
They
then.
should have both
both
been
flaccid,
Yeah,
sorry.
they should have both passed the rigor mortis.
Yes,
Because obviously the pathologist said that it was if I had 5 to 7 days elapsed between the murder and the burial, that rigor mortis would have passed. So
Yeah.
that simply just could not have been
Could
true.
not be true, no.
Yeah. But I just find that weird as well, because I thought even if they don't know about rigor mortis, surely they would just say the same for both of them, because if they were killed at the same time,
Well, yeah, exactly.
they would either both be stiff or they were both soft.
I know.
So I found that weird
Exactly, yeah.
That just seemed strange. So research into Christopher's lifestyle only heightened suspicion over the Edwards account of events. Police discovered that he was a gun enthusiast and that he'd been a member of a gun club, that he'd owned guns, and whilst police were able to account for some of the guns that he had formerly owned, one gun that they could never account for was a .38 revolver, and they had no idea what happened to that gun.
Right, okay.
The murder weapon was never recovered,
Okay.
but the bullets were, obviously, I said that earlier, the bullets were there. And the forensic analysis proved very interesting. So a ballistic expert attended the post-mortem and then took away the bullets to look at. He was able to tell the police that they had been fired by a .38 revolver. Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise, yeah.
So, yeah, it could have been a coincidence that Richard? Who the hell is Richard?
I have
I have no idea where that just came from.
Have you written Richard?
No. I have no idea. I don't know. I don't even know anybody called Richard. It wasn't like my mind was wandering to somebody else. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it could have been a coincidence that Christopher had that type of gun, but without the gun they couldn't say for sure that the murder weapon had been his. But, you know, pretty big coincidence.
I was going to say it does sound like that to me.
Yeah. So the Edwards identical interviews and the post-mortem results, I'm going to start that again because I wasn't feeling the flow there. I don't know why.
When are you ever feeling the flow?
I know, for some reason I've just been put off by saying Richard.
Right.
Get together.
Yeah, go.
So the Edwards identical interviews and the post-mortem results left DCI Griffin even less convinced by their accounts of what happened. It's the same.
Yeah, I'm not feeling their stories are very true at the moment.
So he said 2 victims, both hit in the core of their bodies with 2 bullets each. One victim supposedly fired by Susan Edwards, who on her own admission and on Christopher's was frightened to death of firearms. But yet she claimed that she'd been the one that had shot, and Christopher was a gun enthusiast. You know, it's...
Yeah, it's not adding up.
It isn't, is it?
No.
So he, like DCI Griffin, he's like, nah. He thinks, both of them travelled up to Mansfield on that bank holiday. But it was Christopher and not Susan that pulled the trigger.
My God, why? I'll find out, but if that is the case, like, why is she taking the fall for him?
Well, do you want a spoiler? We're not going to find out. Because it's only them that knows, isn't it?
Oh, that's true.
So, so DCI Griffin, he was like, nah, it was Christopher, not Susan, that pulled the trigger. He was the man with the firearms history. But obviously, and I'm trying to prove that without a murder weapon as well.
Yeah,
nightmare.
I mean, it's impossible.
Yeah, so DCI Griffin needed to find a motive to prove his theory that this had been a double murder and not manslaughter. So I think, to be honest, it's not even really a case of who pulled the trigger. I think it's more of a case of just proving that they were both murdered.
Yeah.
And that both these people are in on it, and they should both be charged with murder rather than manslaughter.
Yeah.
I think that's more
what they're trying to find out.
Yeah. So somehow police had to find the reason why a daughter and son-in-law would kill their parents in cold blood. So they wanted to build up a picture of William and Patricia Wycherley, what they're like, what their lifestyle was like, and what they found was that they actually had little or no contact with the world outside of their marriage.
Oh, right, okay.
So the neighbour that I spoke about earlier, John, he said that when the Wycherleys first moved in, he would say hello over the garden fence, and he introduced himself, and William had sort of said, yeah, hi, I'm William. But that was it. He just didn't want to seem to chat or tell John anything about himself. And William would be out in the garden a lot, obviously gardening, and him and John would say hello, but that would be it, and they never said anything else.
Right, okay.
And William would just get on in his garden. But I don't think that's weird, because I'm like that. Well, I speak to one of my neighbours over the fence.
I don't really speak to... I always say hi to my neighbours that I see, but I don't... I have had conversations with neighbours, but I don't make a point about that often. It's I mean, normally you get the high and then that's it. I mean,
to me that's quite normal. Like, not a lot of people know much about their neighbours, do they?
No, not that much, no.
But John said that he rarely saw Patricia. He would sometimes see them walk past, but William and Patricia never walked together. William was always between 10 and 20 yards in front of Patricia.
No.
Do you know what that reminds me of, though? And I can't say that was the case in this. Is there not something to do with, like, royals or something like that? Or something that happened in the past that the man would always sort of walk in front of the women? It was like a sort of... Oh, I don't know. I'll just shut up.
Maybe you're right.
I don't know. No, there's something niggling in my head that I've heard of that before. And I don't know why it would be, or... I don't know.
Well, you carry on, I'll go and I'll tell you that.
You probably won't even find anything. So William, like, he used to carry the shop in, and Patricia just sort of wandered along behind him. John said that they were polite people, but they just wanted to be on their own.
Yeah.
So the Wycherleys were reclusive. They didn't socialise with friends. They weren't especially close to their family. They didn't have any hobbies or go anywhere particular at any given time, and that's probably part of the explanation as to why they went unmissed for all those years.
Mm-hmm.
Are you finding anything? Because...
Not really, because it's all about body language and stuff.
Just forget about it. Like, I have something in my head. I don't know. It could be, like, maybe a control thing, or... Like, the man sort of supposedly being better than the women or something. There's something niggling, but I don't know what it is. So I'm just going to shut up and just carry on with the case.
Okay.
So the police, as I said before, they still couldn't find a photo of Patricia and only managed to locate a few family members. Vivian Steenson, who was William's niece, said that she met him for the first time when she was 18 or 19. Yeah, I thought it was weird as well, but it's actually when you hear the reason, it's not.
Oh, right.
So she said that he didn't fight in the war, so he was called a deserter.
Oh, right, okay.
So basically, if you were a deserter, you would get punished for being a deserter. So if you were a deserter, basically you would hide, you would flee, you would go.
Right, okay, so he didn't want to fight in the war.
Yeah, so he only returned after there was like an amnesty because they wanted people reunited with their families and stuff. So they were just like, no, right, okay, if you come back now, nothing's gonna happen. You're not gonna get punished for it. So he'd been away for all this time with the war. I mean, 18 or 19 is still a long time because the war didn't last for 18 or 19 years.
Oh,
but,
no, it didn't.
Part of the reason for that was because he had been away, and I don't know how long it took for the amnesty to come through right enough. So maybe that would account for it, maybe.
Possibly.
So that meant he couldn't be prosecuted.
Right. Okay.
Because I'm saying to get punished. I think they'd be like put in prison and that before the amnesty. So.
Yeah, I think so.
So she never met him until like she was basically an adult.
Right.
And police discovered that when William had moved to Mansfield, Vivian saw him less, but they would often write to each other. So Vivian said that he told her a lot about his relationship with his son-in-law Christopher, and he would tell Vivian how much he disliked him.
Right, okay.
He thought that Christopher came from a very bad background. He disapproved of the marriage, and he did everything he could to prevent his daughter Susan from marrying him. She said one time William was so upset that he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. So Vivian wrote to him and said, like, you're just gonna have to try and pull yourself together and accept it.
Oh yeah.
And Vivian said he appeared to do that. But Vivian wasn't convinced that he ever truly accepted the marriage. But I think, he obviously did pull himself together and just sort of got on with things. Because obviously Susan married him whether her dad liked it or not.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Exactly.
So Vivian had her own theory as to why Susan was willing to defy her dad for Christopher. So she said that she thinks that Susan admired Christopher because he liked violence and war. And he was into shooting and all that kind of stuff, which her dad wasn't.
Right.
Vivian said that William was a very peace-loving man. He didn't like any kind of violence, which is fine. So, but so was my dad, and I didn't go for somebody who I didn't marry somebody who liked violence and like shooting. I was just my husband did have guns. Yeah, but not the same.
Not for a violent reason, though.
No, my husband is not violent. I didn't think that was a very good reason for and why would you admire somebody because you like violence and war?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't think that's anything to be admired of.
No, I don't get that.
No, that does sound a bit nonsense.
So Vivian's accounts pointed to family tensions that could have led to a heated crime of passion, but DCI Griffin needed more to prove murder. So fortunately, remember I said about the financial investigation. So that started revealing some answers. So the killings having happened on that bank holiday weekend meant that obviously the bank was shut on the Monday because it was a bank holiday weekend.
Yes, of course.
So the first available opportunity that Susan would have to go into a bank would have been the next day, Tuesday, the 5th of May.
Yeah.
And they were able to prove that she did go into a bank on the Tuesday.
Right.
So the very first chance that she had, she went to the bank and she cleared out her parents' accounts. So that gave a motive for murder. Money.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I'm sure you're wondering how not one single person realised that the Wycherleys were missing. So I'm going to sort of tell you how the Edwards stopped anyone from realising.
Right, okay.
Excuse me. So John, the neighbour, he said that he only saw Christopher maybe 5 times a year in the garden in the summer because he'd be cutting the grass or whatever.
Yeah.
And he would tell John that William and Patricia were well, they were loving it in Morecambe because he'd obviously ask, how are they getting on? No, great, yeah, they're loving it.
Yeah.
So obviously, the neighbours aren't going to think anything of it, are they? I mean,
they thought they've moved and the daughter and son-in-law or nephew at the time.
Yeah, I don't know.
The family members have moved into their house instead.
So obviously the neighbours aren't going to think anything of it. So Susan would respond to any letters that arrived for her parents, and she would send Christmas cards to relatives that her parents used to do. There was only really one person who William was regularly in contact with, and that was his niece, Vivian. So Susan must have thought it was too risky to pretend that she was her dad writing letters, obviously, because that would be hard.
Yeah.
So she wrote to Vivian as herself, and she told Vivian that she was in touch with her dad all the time.
Yeah.
But it wasn't writing to anyone because, in Susan's words, because I kind of thought it was a bit weird that she said he was a bit decrepit by that time, and I thought that's not a very nice word to use, is it?
Oh no, that's not nice at all.
No, but apparently that's what she said. Susan had said that he was a bit decrepit by that time.
Right.
He was physically fit, but mentally a bit confused. So he couldn't really write letters or cards to people, so she had to do it for him.
Right, okay.
So that sort of gives the excuse
So
to
she
Vivian.
could then send letters, say, oh, well, he's doing this and he's doing that. Right, okay, yeah.
So Vivian said she wasn't suspicious at all, and she just accepted that her uncle had gone older, but Susan actually told her that he was travelling in Ireland.
So
maybe so that she didn't go looking for him or something. So
but yet you just said he's decrepit and a bit mentally...
Yeah, but he's physically fit, so it's just mentally...
I know, but mentally travelling, I mean, I think that's...
I don't know.
Okay. Fair dues.
I mean, she did, from what I got from it, I mean, she said he was a bit confused. Mentally, he was a bit confused. So, I mean, and obviously he was travelling with his wife.
Right.
I don't know. That's just what we know.
Enough.
So, if a doctor wrote to them, which they did sometimes, as William had medical issues, then a letter would be sent back to the doctor, pretending to be William, or written by Susan saying, I'm writing on my dad's behalf, just explaining why he couldn't attend certain appointments. So they managed to keep dodging medical appointments.
You think they'd be using the phone by this point? I mean,
Well,
the letter seems a bit more back in the day.
well, do you not get letters from your doctor?
No.
We do.
Do you?
Yeah. If they haven't, I mean, we do have they'll phone you, but if they can't get hold of you, if you didn't answer the phone when they phone you, then they'll write a letter.
Well, I mean, I've not really been...
And you get appointments by letter. Like if you get hospital appointments, you get them by letter. So.
All right, okay, I get that. I mean, I was thinking just doctors. I was thinking hospital sort of appointments.
Well, I just said if a doctor work in hospitals as well.
That's very true.
But you would think, you'd think by now that because, I know if I got a letter for an appointment, I couldn't make it, I would phone them.
Yeah.
And because that's what they usually say, if you can't make the appointment, please call us.
Yeah, you wouldn't write a letter back to your doctor.
Exactly. And by this point, we're into sort of 2000s, really, because it was 1998 that...
Even more so. I mean, that's the kind of thing I would have thought you would have done way back.
Well, obviously, they were still doing it by letter, so fair enough. And the doctors obviously weren't pushing these appointments, were they? Because they were getting away with it. Mm-hmm. So back to the investigation, everything...
I'm going to have to open my juice, so I'm sorry if you hear the... I need a drink. Sorry.
So professional.
I know.
And then you're going to burp because you're drinking fizzy juice.
I'm not, I'm just going to have a wee sip.
So, you alright? You okay?
I'm good.
So back to the investigation. Everything was relying on the ongoing financial investigation. So it all started on Tuesday the 5th of May. So that was the day that the bank first opened after the bank holiday.
Yeah.
Susan had went into a Halifax bank in Mansfield. She closed her parents' joint account and she reopened a new account in her and her mum's name. I know what you're going to say. How did she manage to close down her parents'
I was just going, yeah, how? Because the only way you can really do that without them is surely if they die and have a death certificate.
No, I think maybe if you have written consent, I think like now I don't think you'd be able to do that.
No.
But I think you might have been able to maybe have written consent or something like that because she's acting on behalf of her parents. If she can prove that they're her parents, which she would be able to with, I mean, she would have a birth certificate. I don't know, but she maybe could saying like, "Oh, my parents are older. They're not capable of coming themselves."
True.
Maybe.
Yeah, true.
I don't know. That's just. But obviously she did manage to do it.
Yeah,
so
she obviously managed it somehow.
yeah. So she opened an account in her and her mum's name, which I think was a bit strange as well because I thought that her mum would have to be there to open the account. Is that not what you do? I haven't opened a bank account for a long time.
I mean, the last time I opened one would have been obviously with Justin, but we were both there, so
Yeah, exactly.
I've never tried to do it without, so I don't actually know.
Yeah, same. I mean, I've got the only time I've ever had a joint bank account is with John.
I mean, the only thing that I can maybe relate to is I remember when me and Justin had to get a loan from the bank, and I actually think it was when I was pregnant and I wasn't feeling very well, so I couldn't go with him, and he was allowed to bring the paperwork home for me to sign it. And then obviously it all went through. I didn't actually have to be there to do it, so I don't know if maybe there's a maybe she was allowed to take paperwork home and maybe
she did it that day.
Oh, or about finalising it. I mean, maybe even if she's done it, she could still have to finalise it or something. I don't know.
No, because I'm just about to tell you.
Oh no! You carry
That's
on,
why I'm just sitting here going, right, just shut up now. No, so basically, so what she did is she opened a joint account in her and her mum's name, and she transferred £40,000 from her parents' joint account into the new one with her and her mum, and then she withdrew the whole lot. So basically, she did that all. That's what I'm saying. She did all that in one day.
But would that not? I mean, obviously, I've never worked in a bank in my life, of course, so I have no idea how they operate. But I mean, would that not flag up to somebody in the bank? Because that would be, I think, if somebody came along to me and said, "Oh, I'd just like to close my mum and dad's account, open up a new one with my mum, transfer the money, but actually just withdraw."
I know it seems very suspicious, doesn't it?
Because I mean, if they were closing the mum and dad's bank account, then you would have thought maybe they would just withdraw the money from that. Like, why go to the hassle of opening up another one? I
have no idea. I've never actually thought about it that way. But if she's closing the account, she should be able to just take that money out.
Well, yeah.
Unless she's not allowed to, she's got to, she can close the account, but she can't take the money out. So
maybe
legally she has to move it into her own account with her own name.
But it's still suspicious, though.
Well, what? Well, yeah, of course it is. I just don't get how she. If she was allowed to take that money out, I mean, what I'm thinking is, right, she's had to make an account with her mum's name on it, to allow her to take the money. But if she was allowed to take that money anyway, without her mum being present, why does she have to bother opening an account with her mum's name? Why does she not just transfer it to her own account?
Well, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
It doesn't add up. But this is
like I say, we're no expert in how the bank
no,
operates,
of course not. And I'm only relaying what I've read. I mean, unless there was more to it.
Possibly. But I just find that working in a bank, you something like that must be, because I mean, it's not every day somebody comes along and takes £40,000 out an account, and
from their parents and not having their parents there, and
well, exactly. Yeah. To me, it just seems a bit suspicious. But obviously, I know we weren't there. We
weren't there. It does seem suspicious. We weren't there, and we obviously, I mean, as well. I mean, from the account that I've taken this from, it could be just condensing it down, Maybe she didn't get. I mean, I just said she withdrew the lot, but it doesn't necessarily say that it was that day. So
yeah,
maybe we're kind of getting it wrong a bit. But if you're drinking again, you're going to end up burping.
I've got to try throat.
So we'll just move on from that. I think we've spent enough time on that. But that's what they got £40,000 from her parents. So, so over the course of the next 15 years. The Edwards continued to take any money that the Wycherleys received. So that was they took their pensions, they had benefits that they were on, They took that money.
So I'm assuming that must have all got paid into this new account with her mum's name on it.
It must have done.
What about her dad though? Because surely everything wouldn't have been necessarily in all her mum's name. Like, what about her dad's pension? I wonder how that got.
Well, you
taken.
used to be able to go to the post office and cash it, and you could cash it for other people. But as I said, like we're talking about in the 2000s now. I mean, I'm thinking back to like the 90s, and I know back then you could get. That's why there was always a massive queue out the post office on a Tuesday, I think it was, because everybody would be queuing to get their pension.
Yeah.
But I'm sure as time went on into sort of the 2000s, it was getting paid into bank accounts. Well, yeah. So again,
I know. I mean, because her dad would have his own pension as well. So where's that gone? Like, how's that been distributed out? I mean,
you can get your pension paid in anywhere, really. So they could have made it. She could have changed that for his pension to go into her mum and her account.
I just thought it had to have like his name on that somewhere, so they knew it was going to the right person.
No, you can get paid into any account. Yeah. This is why, like, some people, when they're in controlling relationships and that, they make people get it. I mean, like that, the one with the kids in the fire. What was their name?
Oh, yes.
I can't remember their name. The Philpotts.
Potts, yeah.
The Philpotts, he used to get his wife or girlfriend or whatever, used to get their wages paid into his bank account. So she would go out and work, and her wages would get paid into his account.
Yeah.
So you can do it.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why they've done that. Anyway, but we need to stop.
I know.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know exactly.
We don't know exactly, but this is what happened. So they did get the money, like their benefits, their pensions, whatnot. So, and they took out credit cards, they took out loans in their parents' names, and they ended up selling their house as well. So they sold up the house. I don't know when it was that they sold the house, but they sold the house and they moved to a flat in London.
Right.
So obviously they got the money from that as well. So they got over £250,000 during that 15-year period. And they basically spent it because when they were arrested, they had no money.
Yeah.
So they spent over £250,000 during that 15-year period.
Is that why they gave themselves up? Because they ran out of money?
You stop. Just wait till we get to the end. Sorry. So the police were wondering, as you would, what the hell did they spend that? £250,000 is a lot of money, and
to have nothing to show for it.
As I'm going to tell you, they were hardly living the high life.
Okay.
They were living in a tiny top floor council flat in Dagenham in Essex. So I said London, it was Essex. It's close, isn't it? Christopher worked, so he was still working. He worked as a credit control officer for Hallmark, the company that makes the greeting cards. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So he worked for them. Susan, she had worked before she met Christopher. She'd been a library assistant, and she'd also had a clerical position with the Metropolitan Police at one point.
Oh, did she?
But she obviously never learned anything about law.
No, clearly not.
But once her and Christopher got married, she became a full-time housewife. So they were living in this tiny little flat. She wasn't working, so they were obviously only relying on his wage coming in. Uh-huh. They didn't have any friends. They were actually very like Susan's parents. They were very reclusive and kept themselves to themselves. They didn't really have anything outside the marriage, basically like her parents. Uh-huh. So, what had they done with all this money?
What had they done with all this money?
Turns out that the contents of the suitcases that Edwards had when they were arrested gave the answer. They had spent almost every penny of that money on memorabilia. They would buy autographed photos and like property belonging to like famous people over the internet.
Right.
So it's thought that one of the most expensive pieces that they bought was a signed photo of Gary Cooper. And I'm like, okay, I don't even know who Gary Cooper is.
I was going to say, who the hell is Gary Cooper?
I knew you were going to say that as well, so I thought I should maybe Google Gary Cooper, find out who he is.
Yes.
Because I didn't want to go, I reckon. So anyway, he was a Hollywood actor from way back when. He was like born in 1901 and he died in 1961. So he's like way before your time.
Right.
Like black and white, all that.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But this signed photo, this one individual signed photo cost £7,000.
What?
They paid £7,000 for a photo.
But whoever they bought that off was laughing, eh?
Well, yeah, like, what? So this is what they were spending their money on. Like, so if they're paying £7,000 for one piece, and then they've got whatever else they've got. I mean,
I don't understand why they had it with them. But then, so when they were in France, were they living in France or they were on holiday in France?
They were living in France. Can you just stop asking questions?
I know, because well, something like you were just telling me that they were living in bloody Essex, and I'm thinking, but I thought they were living in France.
Yeah, I know, but we're going to get to that.
Okay.
You're impatient. Obviously, I'm going to tell you the story.
Right, okay, go.
So the police continued interviewing the couple, and Susan revealed to the police during her interview, what potentially explained why she killed her own parents. I don't think she realised that she was, she was obviously just talking and...
It came out.
Yeah, not realising what she was actually doing. But there were issues over the sale of a house in London where the Wycherleys had forced Susan to take her name off the deeds. So I couldn't really get much information about it. So what I'm assuming is it must have been her parents' house, but her name was on the deed. So I'm assuming that was... I'm assuming that basically they were planning on living in that house till they died, and then just to make things easier, it was just going to get passed to her. Like it was in her name, the deeds, so she would inherit the house, basically.
Right, yeah.
So it's an inheritance thing. That's what I'm assuming.
But they obviously must have changed their mind about that. Sorry.
So they made her take her name off the deeds when they sold it, and the money from that helped. See, they obviously decided, we're not going to live here for the rest of our lives. We are going to move. So but she didn't get any of the money of it. Like that money obviously helped pay for the house in Mansfield.
Right. Okay.
So I'm sure Susan would have been well pissed off about that because, well, I would.
She thought she was obviously...
Because that was her inheritance.
Yeah.
So criminologist Dr. Elizabeth Yardley said about it, quote, "The house was very symbolic for Susan because some of the money that her parents had used to buy that house she thought was rightfully hers." Which is fair enough. Like, if her name was on the deed and, she'd been promised this house, then...
Oh, yeah, I guess.
So that house was a constant reminder of the fact that she felt that they had ripped her off. So by burying the bodies in the garden of that property, this wasn't just about keeping her eye on the crime scene, but this was the ultimate insult to her parents.
But then she would have inherited that house when they died.
Well, obviously she wasn't
naturally,
thinking,
not obviously
she didn't want to wait for that, obviously.
Really?
So it was demeaning, it was disempowering. She was turning round to them and saying, "This is my house now, and there's nothing you can do about it." End quote. Basically, that's what the criminologist is saying.
To be fair, that's quite a fair assumption, actually, because it does sound quite...
But yeah, you're right. I mean, so they used... But what I'm assuming is that house must have been paid off, the one that they sold in London.
Yeah.
Whereas they only used some of that money to help pay for the new house. So the new house must have still had a mortgage on it.
Right, because it was obviously, what I'm thinking here is, like, why are you getting so mad? Because if they were living in the one in London, if they had decided that's where they were living till they died, then she wouldn't have got money from that inheritance until they died. But she obviously thought, because they decided they were moving, that maybe she was going to get money from that sale at that point.
Yeah.
And she was annoyed that she didn't. But she should have just been like, well, tough, I have to accept that, and I'll get it when they die from the house that they are in, I'm going to move into.
To me, if you're going to get an inheritance, then obviously you wait till your parents die, and it doesn't matter. I would rather have my parents here than have any amount of money,
exactly.
no matter what.
Totally.
I mean, that's the way it should be. So if you're going to have to wait longer for your inheritance, you should be happy about that because your parents are still
alive.
here.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So the Edwards kept up this pretense of the Wycherleys still being alive until the summer of 2012. So that was 14 years. And one day the Department for Work and Pensions sent William a letter. This letter, so they must have been getting their mail redirected to their, because obviously they're... Well, would they have said... Oh no, they would have had to say they'd moved, wouldn't they? Because somebody else has bought that house.
Yeah, they would have had to, yeah.
So they must have told everywhere that their address was, the Wycherleys had moved. So this letter was because William was approaching his 100th birthday. So his pension and benefits needed reassessing, meaning that William would have to attend an appointment. So the Edwards realised, right,
Game's up,
and they fled to France. See, I told you I'd get there.
Right, okay.
So that's why they went to France. They were just like, right, okay, we're going.
Up and leave.
Yeah. So, but in France, obviously, they weren't able to get the Wycherleys benefits and pensions, so they ran out of money pretty quickly.
Right.
So they were unwilling to sell any of their memorabilia. So they decided to call Christopher's stepmom for help. And remember, we were like, they were actually phoning for financial help. That's what they were phoning for. I said we'd get to it later.
Help, yeah. They were phoning for advice on what to do.
No, they were phoning for, because they'd ran out of money. But she was like, obviously, no, I'm not giving you you're murderers. I'm not giving you fucking money.
But it's funny though, if they needed help with money, why didn't they just ask for the money and not then tell about
Well, yeah,
the
I don't know why that happened. I don't know why they admitted to that. That just seems really strange to me. But obviously, as we know, it didn't work out too well for them, and she quite rightly phoned the police. On the 2nd of November, 2013, Susan and Christopher Edwards were officially charged with murder. And on the 5th of June 2014, they went on trial at Nottingham Crown Court. They both pleaded not guilty to murder. Christopher claimed that he had nothing to do with the killings at all, and he hadn't even been present when they happened, and that he was only involved in the burial, the cover-up and the theft.
Right.
Susan was still saying that her mum was responsible for the death of her dad, and she had been provoked and was acting in self-defence. But she accepted that she was responsible for the death of her mum, but not guilty of murder.
Right, okay.
Susan claimed that she was sexually abused throughout her childhood by her dad, and she said that her mum provoked her to shoot her that night because her mum admitted that she had been well aware of it when it was happening.
Right, okay.
Whether that's true or not, I don't know. No, I don't know. So, an interesting detail that came out in court was that Susan had spent several years forging letters, posing as the French film actor Gérard Depriest. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it.
Oh, yeah, uh-huh.
You know who that is?
Yeah.
And sent them to Christopher.
What?
So,
why? What? That's a bit random.
yeah, because he was a fan. And, she even went as far as buying a special franking machine. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, because I'm old and I remember what it is, it's like when I worked in an office, it was a machine that you'd use to put a postmark on the letters. Rather than putting stamps on them,
yeah.
you'd put it through this machine that would stamp it. So you
Right.
could just go and, you had a bundle of letters and you just put them in the post box rather than
Right.
putting stamps on
Yeah,
each
yeah, yeah.
individual one. Right. So she got this franking machine, she must have got it from France, so that it would have a French postmark on it. So she did that to make the envelopes look authentic. And she would write in poor English to make Christopher believe that these letters were from Gerard. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. And he fully believed it. What? Anyway, we'll just move past that. After a lengthy trial, Susan and Christopher were both found guilty of murder, and they were sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years each in prison. They were also sentenced to a further 9 years to be served concurrently for disposing of the Wycherleys' bodies and stealing their money. The judge was convinced that Christopher was the one to shoot the Wycherleys, but that Susan had still played a part in the murder. Although her cousin Vivian actually thinks it was all Christopher, and Susan's sentence was too harsh because she had no part in the actual killing of her parents. So I don't know why she's covering up for him, if that was the case. But less than a month after sentencing, 14 people attended the Wycherleys' funeral, but none of them even really knew the couple. It was just like sort of extended family kind of thing. The Edwards memorabilia, which was listed as Susan's property, was sold. Over the years, they had stolen over £250,000. They had spent £15,000. So I don't know where the rest of it was, because they had spent £15,000 just on the stuff that was in their suitcases. But so I don't know where. But the police got less than £3,000 for the lot. So out of all that money that they spent,
Jesus. Just shows you memorabilia isn't always good to buy.
no. And Christopher's assets were valued at £17.06.
Jesus.
So that's how skint they were. So in 2015, Susan appealed her sentence, and she again claimed that her dad had abused her all through her childhood and that the length of her sentence didn't take into account the provocation, but she lost the appeal. The judge said, quote, "Given that you left home in the early 1980s, some 15 years before the murders, I cannot accept that this conduct, wholly wrong as it was, explains your decision to kill him in 1998. So she was, I mean, we don't know if he did abuse her or not, but that is, if she did kill her dad, whoever killed him, that's not an excuse for it. Like,
no, definitely
not 15 years later.
No,
Like,
exactly.
maybe in the heat of it, when it's happening, but if you left home 15 years before,
Yeah.
you've gone home and then killed him, you can't use that as an excuse. As horrific as if he did do it,
Yeah.
like, you still can't.
No, exactly.
So even if he did abuse her, she was just using it, still just using it as an excuse. And if he didn't do it, then that's disgusting. Even more disgusting that she's using it as an excuse.
Definitely.
So there you go. So
Wow, that was a good one.
it was a bit different. Like, yeah. So are we gonna highlight our missing person of the week?
Yes, as I said at the start, I was going to let you know about the missing person. So this girl, because obviously I've seen the post of the missing person, and the person who's posted it has said that she's not actually listed as a missing person.
Oh.
Because it's like the woman and her boyfriend that are considered missing, but apparently they're homeless, so this woman can't get them listed as a missing person. But she's saying that the reason that she's concerned is that her last messages from her are very disturbing, so she's obviously concerned for this girl's welfare. So her name is Jennifer. Jennifer Barnett / Hughes. So I'm not sure if she's married.
She maybe goes by either name.
By either name. She is approximately 5'7", brown hair, brown eyes. She wears glasses as well. She's been travelling with her boyfriend across country, and his name is Gary Depriest. But the woman that I posted saying that the last messages from Jennifer indicated that she may be in danger. So our last location was Peoria in Arizona. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but
I'll put it in the show notes so it'll be spelled out.
So around Glendale, Arizona. So if anybody obviously has any information, if they could please call the police. Unfortunately, I don't have any numbers, but just the main.
Just
police,
call the police, yeah.
911.
911, yeah. Or they might have.
Yeah, but Gary, as I said, is Jenny's boyfriend. She's been travelling with him since December, so it's been since December last year that they've been on 2021, so no one's been able to contact them. And apparently just the one significant thing is that Jenny has a teddy bear. She never leaves this teddy bear behind, and apparently the teddy bear itself has a burn on it from a heater. There's a picture of the teddy bear as well. So
yeah, I can put that on social media.
If anyone has obviously seen them, heard from them or anything, please just get in touch with the police and make them aware. And obviously we'll put the post on social media, so if you can share it around, then that would be great.
I'll put the information in the show notes as well, so that because especially with Laura not being able to pronounce that word, whatever that was. So yeah, it'll be all written out. So if anybody can help, or even if you don't live anywhere near there, even in a different country, even you can just share it on your social media, because you never know who's going to see it.
Exactly.
So thank you for listening, and if you want to get in contact with us about anything, our information will be in the show notes.
And if you don't already, and you enjoy our shows, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, review.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.